Good morning and welcome to Hard Lens Media Radio, broadcasting live from Que4 Radio, 1680 AM in Chicago. I'm Lainey Peterson and my co-hosts are Kit Cabello and Paul DuPont. Dan and Fernando are out of the studio reporting on a demonstration for clean water in East Chicago. They're going to be calling in with a live report later on in the show. But joining us in the studio today is our good friend, Mr. Darren Marshall of Que4's News, What News, which broadcasts every Tuesday. Is it 5?
Tuesday, 4 to 6.
4 to 6, 4 to 6. Thank you so much, Darren. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming into the studio.
Why, thank you kindly.
We got a lot to talk about.
Oh, boy, do we.
Oh, boy, do we ever. Okay, first of all, obviously, we ended the show last week with some of the news that was coming in from Charlottesville, which was just kind of hitting the media and the wires at that point. We know what happened there. We know that the tragic events that took place there. The aftermath, and this week has been just one long emergency. So we're going to talk about this, but in the second half of the show. We're going to devote the entire second half of our show to that because, you know what? The world is still spinning. Mm-hmm. And there's stuff going on in many places, locally, around the world, nationally, everywhere. So we're going to get started with a story that came in this week. It's about gerrymandering in Texas. There is a federal court that has managed to, thankfully, I think, invalidate part of Texas's congressional map, saying that it is disenfranchising certain voters in those areas, Hispanic voters specifically. So there's a history behind this. We were talking about it during the show, guys, or right before the show. Yeah. And so there's a history in some states of gerrymandering to disenfranchise certain voters on the base of race or ethnicity. And there were federal laws that required some oversight of these maps. That was suspended back in 2013, wasn't it?
That sounds right.
Yeah. And basically the Supreme Court said, well, the federal Supreme Court said, well, you know, we don't really have that much of a problem anymore, so we're just going to suspend this. But apparently, there are still problems going on. So, Paul, you and I were talking about this before the show. It's kind of interesting. Not that gerrymandering is anything particularly unusual. If anybody's ever seen the way the wards and the precincts are district in Chicago, it's quite remarkable.
It is weird.
It's like some of them
actually surround.
It's a jigsaw puzzle.
It is.
It's like somebody brought in like Jackson Pollock and just splattered here and there. Okay, we know what's going on here.
Yeah. It's gerrymandering is nothing new. I think most people understand how it's done, why it's done, and what the consequences of it are. It's done pretty much everywhere. I think most people understand what the solution to it would be and the roadblocks to getting that solution. The solution to it really is you need independent districting groups. You need a nonpartisan group that can either mathematically, by the census, or through some other deliberative method, create districts that are fair. And the sort of rhetorical line that people like to use, and I think is very good, is the people should choose their politicians. The politicians shouldn't choose their voters.
Exactly, and this is all about keeping power. And if you're a Republican or if you're a Democrat, do you really want to risk losing a chances to losing your seat, or do you want to do everything you can to basically keep your power and by controlling a district? And see, that's not how democracy works, though. So this is a long.
It isn't.
Yeah, this is a long, sad history
I had no
idea. Of really our country and how we elect our officials. We have them make up the political maps, all at the same time ignoring the will of an ever-changing populace. And that's why we still have a lot of districts that are still kind of very conservative or very right-wing. But at the same time, too, we got a lot of establishment Democrat districts as well. And we need to walk away from that.
I have a perfect solution for gerrymandering. You take a map of the state or the city or whatever, and then you fold it in half, then you fold it in half again, then you keep folding it in half, then you unfold it, and all those creases, the little squares, that's your area.
It may be more fair than what they're doing now.
Well, I think we need to look into it just a little bit more. I think we need to stop making it all complicated and really carve out district areas.
It's complicated now.
Yeah, well, of course it's complicated now. But the only way to really do it is like what Paul said. You need to have independent organizations that have no political affiliation to Democrats or Republicans.
Fake news.
And then have them really bring out an open, vibrant populace so that we can have elected officials really talk to people. Because right now here in the United States, Democrats and Republicans, we just don't talk. And that's also including independents. Like, no one's talking to each other. We're all in our little enclosed district areas with walls around us, and we don't really know what's really affecting us today. And we have politicians that say things we want to hear, but they're not doing things we want them to do.
I want to read this couple of sentences from an article on this districting issue in Texas from the Texas Tribune. So they say on Tuesday, the court ruled the intentional discrimination behind the 2011 maps carried over into the 2013 map in places like Congressional District 35 and Congressional District 27, where the district boundaries were unchanged because the legislature engaged in no deliberative process to remove any such taint and intentionally furthered and continued the existing discrimination in the plans. That's kind of disgusting, right? It's hard to hear. And it's hard to just watch such open and blatant corruption of the system. And it's not, the worst part is that it's not unique, but the good thing is we finally have a judge or a group of judges who are willing to go, we said you can't do that. You're still doing it. So at least that's good.
Yeah, but it's something that hopefully people who are working on voter disenfranchisement issues can pay attention to. Take this stuff, this is part and parcel of a system. When you have voter ID, when you have judges that can come in and dismiss somebody just by questioning them, when you have voter ID laws that make it virtually impossible for some people to get an ID. If you have people who have voter ID have been voting for 40 years in one state, they go to live with their kids in another state, and they find they can't vote because none of their documents are being accepted by the state into which they have moved.
Yeah.
When this sort of thing is happening, and so this is part and parcel of that. When you can either deny a person a right to get into that voting booth, or you can make their vote not count by diluting or shifting
or
the demographics.
Or you could scare them away from voting by trying to get all their voter information and their Social Security number. Blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
It was exposed in Cook County recently, as a matter of fact. I saw something in the Tribune.
Voter registration?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, not good.
No.
And not good at all. Okay, moving on to the international scene. A tragic situation happened in India. In northeastern India, late last week, or early this week. 33 children died on August 10th and 11th at BRD Medical College in Gorakhpur. And around this time, there was also a disruption in the oxygen supply at the hospital. Apparently, a bill had not been paid. Some of the parents and some people were saying that the children died because the hospital didn't have oxygen. Government officials are saying that's not the case, that the children, there was an unfortunate outbreak of encephalitis, and it all happened at once. This is just incredibly tragic. Seeing the pictures of these families with their babies mourning and crying, and these parents, trying to care for their children under unbelievably difficult conditions. And the issue of whether an oxygen bill was paid, I actually can't say. I mean, government officials are saying one thing. I understand that they have to save face, and maybe it did happen this way, maybe it didn't. You have a developing nation where the conditions are not
well, considering that Trump has businesses everywhere. I'm just saying.
I bring up these stories, and Sierra Leone had a major mudslide. There are hundreds and hundreds, I think somewhere between 400 and 600 people who are dead or missing. As upsetting as everything is happening here, there are people suffering mightily in other parts of the world, and in some cases in developing nations where they really don't have resources to address this. And in this case, in India, I mean, it's one thing that is being noted is that the hospital was dirty, that the hospital was not clean, that there's a great deal of mismanagement. The government officials say that they're doing what they can, but the fact that this oxygen bill happened, or this unpaid oxygen bill happened, and there was a threat of suspension of oxygen supply, just is extremely disturbing.
So there's a quote here from UP Congress President Raj Babar, who says the state government is responsible for the deaths. How can there be a shortage of oxygen? He really is placing the culpability of this on basically the bureaucracy of the state, and sort of this cold, unfeeling, we don't care, you didn't pay such and such bill, so you don't get more oxygen tanks that are needed to save lives. Like, the lack of empathy in pure capitalism is it's awful, and it leads to things like this. It leads to deaths.
Well, they talk about here in the States when Sarah Palin brought up the specter of death panels, when they were talking about offering more accessible health care to people in the U.S. The death panels already exist, and everybody pointed this out. The insurance companies make these decisions all the time. Hospitals can and do make decisions about withholding care and on the basis of costs. And I understand, if you've got a business at the hospital level, well, they've got a hospital to run. But it is distressing when something as basic as oxygen. I mean, I don't know the history of providing liquid oxygen, but I think it's been around for quite some time. I don't think it is a terribly considered to be a terribly sophisticated treatment.
I don't know the ins and outs of the cost of production or distribution of oxygen tanks to medical facilities. There's obviously some cost. I imagine transportation is one of the primary costs. And
it is true that India does have logistics issues, which I think is important also to in understanding much of what goes on in India. Is that a lot of food, for example, it rots because it cannot be transported in time. And we're just talking international news here. I'm going to give a little bit of background on this. One thing that's been happening over the years is international grocery conglomerates have been, like Tesco and Walmart, have been wanting to get into Walmart and open up grocery stores. India has strict rules, however, about foreign companies having majority ownership in a business, in a direct-to-consumer retail business. And so that has not happened. The international companies are saying, we'll take care of the logistics. India is saying, well, we've got some real concerns here, and there's been kind of a stalemate there. There hasn't been the kind of investment in the infrastructure needed to get food back and forth, although I can understand India's position as well.
Do you really want a company like Walmart taking care of that? Because Walmart opened up all these grocery stores, and then they started shutting them down, and they shut them down in the poorest of areas that used to have their own grocery stores, but Walmart came in, got rid of those grocery stores, and then put their own in, and then after they put their own in, they made that town a food desert by taking them out again.
Well, I mean, and that's one of the problems when you're depending entirely on a disinterested for-profit business to manage things that are necessary for survival. And it is a bit disconcerting that these are the options that are being offered. Either privatization or a severely underfunded and corrupt, and governments are obviously corrupt, and they can be corrupted. So when people talk about social programs and whatnot, and people talk about corruption, well, yeah, it does happen. There's fraud, there's corruption, there's inefficiency. But when you're being offered just these two options, this doesn't look real good. And the questions are here, what about sufficient funding of public options? What about, structuring governments so that they're far more transparent? What about not encouraging legacy politicians where you have multiple family members
You have to get money out of politics first and foremost. That's one of the things. It's not only just a problem here in the United States; it's a problem internationally.
It's a global problem.
Yeah, where you have elected officials who are bribed by large monopolies, large industries, large banks. And when they give the money to these politicians, the politicians are going to listen to them because they have the most influence. And this is what happens when you have absolute power and no responsibility. It's the working class, the working poor, the destitute who are left holding the bag. And every time these large corporations make a mistake, we have to pay for it. And in India, there's a huge infrastructure problem. But we here in the United States, we also have an infrastructure problem too. And people suffer because of it. And this privatization, it's just not going to work. When you privatize something, its whole concept is to earn profit. It's not really to help people out. And if the company can save money by ignoring safety protocols or safety regulations and protections, it will, just to earn that extra profit. And we can't have that because now we need certain protections. I mean, let's look at what's happening all across the world. As soon as environmental protections or financial protections are lifted, things go downhill really fast.
Who needs environmental protections? Who needs? It's like everything that we've worked so hard to get here in the States is being just destroyed.
But this is a problem that's being seen internationally.
Yeah.
It's all over, and it's a lot of ways. It's a function of when you have a system that's designed to make profit. It's going to look for every opportunity to externalize costs. So, in an example like you're talking about environmental protections, that's a cost, right? If the government says, you know what, you can't pump unlimited amounts of waste
into Lake Michigan,
yeah, boy, it's a lot cheaper to just dump that stuff into the lake than it is to follow environmental regulations and dispose of it in
a safe way,
in a safe and ethical way. And so by getting rid of those regulations, you can now externalize the cost of pollution onto the people that live near Lake Michigan.
Yep, and we're seeing that in a lot of the communities that border Lake Michigan or that are on Lake Michigan, Chicago. We're right by Lake Michigan. That's where our chief water source. I mean, I'm pretty sure a lot of us don't like the idea of a industry or corporation dumping toxic waste into our drinking water. Oh, wait, that's already happening, especially in our bordering neighboring states. Mm-hmm. And we have to deal with that. Our lake is not clean. It's being polluted.
It's disturbing that who owns the lake? The lake was there long before any of us were born or, going way, way back. Who owns the lake? And if we're going to have a discussion about private ownership, we could start looking at land. How can anybody say that they own land? You can be a steward of land. You can be a custodian of land. And we can say that the lake is under the custodianship of the duly elected government, governments, that border it. But so instead of trying to manage it or to try to exploit it, what about being a steward of this resource? And have governments completely lost that concept of stewardship?
I think it's complicated particularly in the United States anyway. I know we're talking more about what's happening with the oxygen in India, but particularly within the United States, we have a lot of libertarian ideology that influences our perception of economics and our perception of property ownership. And that sort of, once I own it, it's mine, and I have all right over it. It's mine. That philosophy is disingenuous to this point of, hey, that lake was there for millions of years before you existed, and it will continue to exist for however long existence goes on after you cease to exist. So do you really own it?
Not really, but this is the mentality that a lot of people have in regards to conquering land or getting land and then thinking, oh, well, it's going to belong to me and my family for generations onwards. It's a conquest mentality that human beings have yet to evolve out of. We all want to have something to claim and then give it to our descendants. And then our descendants say, my brave ancestor got this land and it's mine and I'll do whatever I want with it. But the thing is, you didn't get that land, and your ancestor didn't get that land. It's gonna live on without you. It doesn't care.
Right. And one of my a very out of context quote of President Obama: "You didn't build that. You did not build that land." Now, shifting gears, but also staying in the realm of government, and this was an interesting story that I found this week when I was meandering around a bit. Last year, I heard a podcast from Foreign Affairs about the state of the U.S. Diplomatic Corps, and there was a real concern that the Diplomatic Corps was not as efficient as it should be. that the best and the brightest were not being recruited, and that this was proving to be a problem on the ground in many of these countries where we have diplomats. The importance of diplomacy, the importance also of having people from the U.S. who are interacting with people in other countries, who are learning from them and about them and getting information, and so that we can figure out how to manage our relationships with them. And it was a very interesting discussion. One thing that was pointed out was that there was a need to bring more women into the diplomatic corps, because in many countries there's a great deal of sex-based segregation. So it's important to have women diplomats who can work with the women in those countries and bring back this information. Well, so I thought that was very interesting, kind of stayed up in the back of my head until this week when I was checking out Politico, and apparently the headline reads, "Interest in the U.S. Diplomatic Corps tumbles in early months of Trump."
You think?
You think. Here we go. This June, the number of Americans who took the Foreign Service exam to start the process of joining the prestigious State Department ranks fell 26% from the same month a year earlier.
Hey, that's his approval rating right now, too.
Yeah.
Well, everything is falling in regards
This is a real
to Trump.
problem. And one of the points, it was a very good point that was made here, is when you have a drop like this, that's bad. Because it's like in the military, you want to be bringing in the good the officers and enlistment who will eventually be your sergeants and your colonels.
Yeah, you want
20 years later.
You want to be able to pick and choose,
and you have to be able to train these people up. I mean, this is the sort of thing where you have to learn over time, and it's not going to happen quickly. It's going to take you decades to get where you need to be with this. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have good people and enough good people doing it now, we're going to pay that bill. 20 years hence.
Part of this makes perfect sense. If you would be the type of person who would consider going into the diplomatic corps, being a part of our, American Foreign Service, you likely don't want to, a lot of people who are not supportive of this president will be put off from jumping in now and,
right.
Taking their exams and getting their feet in the door. But that's it's almost a short-sighted view, because if you're going into American Foreign Service, if you're going to be a diplomat, likely, or the expectation would be that you would serve under many presidents. Probably some administrations you agree with and some you don't.
That is true, but I think a lot of people are also taking a step back and realizing if they go into this, will they be representing policies and political practices that they themselves don't want to be a part of, and they're going to have to battle that subconsciously, like, okay, I'm part of the diplomatic corps and I'm implementing Trump's policies. I can't do this because I don't believe in this, but my president is supporting this thing. I can't in good conscience do that. So we're losing some of the best and the brightest people because Trump, he's antagonizing everyone and everything that doesn't fit in his little world and his point of view.
Which shifts on a daily basis.
It does, and it leads to instability. And plus,
he is shifty.
And plus, look at everyone who he has antagonized, especially during the Republican primary as well as the general election. He's antagonized the country of Mexico. He's antagonized our allies across the sea. He's antagonized Great Britain a few times, and that's been our closest ally since the founding of this republic.
Angela Merkel.
He has really antagonized our Western allies. He has given billions of dollars to Saudi Arabia and other countries, and at the same time too antagonizing North Korea. He's antagonizing the possibility of a global war, and then he goes home here in the United States, he antagonizes African Americans, Native Americans, Latinos, the LGBTQ community, and the Democratic Socialists. He antagonized Democrats and his own party, Republicans. He has antagonized his own party as well. He's going to war with everything and everyone. And how can you, as a diplomat, put in that suit and tie and say, I'm going to represent this president, or I'm going to study the exam so I could become a diplomatic corps and I'm going to represent this president. That is a huge career risk to take part of, and I understand why people aren't involved in
reluctant to do it. But I mean, what the article points out, and I think is important, is if you don't, it's sort of like the military. If you don't get, what does he say? If you don't get your lieutenants in now, you're not going to have your colonels in 10 years, and you're not going to have your admirals in 20.
It's amazing how many people he can antagonize in 18 holes. It's just amazing.
But I was just reading something on Facebook that said, Henry Rollins said, if President Trump has the best words, why does he always use the wrong ones?
Yeah.
It's or something like that. It's just, this is...
I still don't know why Henry Rollins hasn't gone into politics.
I think he may have too much integrity, or he may not want to bother with it either. I mean,
and plus, look at our system and how it is right now. With money in politics, your opponent can buy more ads and sell out, and use that platform to silence any kind of platform you might have.
Have we ever had a president with that many tattoos? No.
Do we have any of our presidents had tattoos?
I don't know.
I mean, I know that tattooing was a thing, like 100 years ago or so. When women had long skirts, they used to get tattoos on their legs. I mean, there was actually a thing. I'm just trying to think, though, if I've ever read anything about a president of the United States that has a tattoo.
I'm looking it up.
Okay, it could be interesting, but I mean, the diplomatic corps. Folks. We talked about something a few weeks ago. We talked about regulatory agencies and commissions and the importance of, if you maybe politics as such aren't for you, you don't want to run for elected office, but there are these regulatory commissions that are often made up of citizens that have a great deal of impact on the day-to-day goings on in various industries and sectors in our communities. Attend those regulatory board meetings. See if you can, get to know these people, that get your input in, get yourself in front of these folks, find out, what it takes to get appointed to some of those regulatory boards. There are other ways of participating in our government that don't involve running for office. And whether it's applying for the diplomatic corps, which I'm going to encourage people to do, no matter how discouraged you may be right now, if that kind of job appeals to you.
Right now we need diplomacy.
We need diplomacy, and we need people who are willing to step up even in a difficult time to do that. But there are other ways of getting involved and making a change and having an impact, and you need to keep a broad mind at this point, even if you're unhappy with the way things are going.
And also, just for a side note, remember last episode we talked about how some of the agencies are ignoring Trump's orders. A lot of people, and including his agencies, just have zero confidence in his ability and his ever-shifting opinion. So people are just going on with what should normally be done. So for the diplomatic corps, if you are studying for it, if you want to make this your career, go for it. Endure this crisis. Trump is his own worst enemy. I hate to make predictions because it's not my place to do so, but sooner or later he's going to run out of allies. He's running out of allies now. People don't support him, and all the people I mentioned he has antagonized, he's now putting more people on his enemy list. One man cannot fight against all those groups and people for too long. It will make him crash and burn, and so he will be gone someday. Whether he gets impeached or he steps down or he doesn't get reelected, I don't know how he's going to stay in power for the next 3 years. It's madness. But things do change. Things will change. And the only way we're going to get a better future is if you, who's listening right now on this radio station, step up and do the right thing.
And right now, the way things are looking, we're at a standstill with lawmaking, too.
Yeah.
Because of him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, if we're at a standstill, if we're at a pause right now, you can get involved. You can find other ways to enter in so that you're ready when things start moving again.
I have an answer to the pressing question of the morning.
Yes.
Presidents Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin D. Roosevelt, James K. Polk, Andrew Jackson, and Dwight D. Eisenhower were all rumored to have tattoos. The only one who was confirmed was Teddy Roosevelt, who has a tattoo of his family crest on his chest.
Well, that would be expected from Teddy Roosevelt.
Good old Theodore Roosevelt. When you guys have to get a chance to watch the Ken Burns documentary on the Roosevelt families.
Oh, it's good, yeah.
Yeah, the first part was Theodore Roosevelt. It's crazy enough it is. That guy was a living legend. See, Trump's just trying to be like TR, but only one man can be TR, and that's Theodore Roosevelt, okay? That's the one and only guy.
He was a man's man, if there ever was one.
Yes. Some of the stories surrounding him is crazy.
Oh, man. Maybe we'll have some fun on a podcast with some of those some of days. We can all talk about them and laugh.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Switching gears now. Many of you who follow us on Howard Lens Media Facebook page know that we do a lot of live streaming. And we were honored to be asked to come out and do a live stream of a debate between the Democratic gubernatorial candidates for Illinois. And our own Mr. Kit Cabello was there and doing interviews and taking names.
Yes.
So, Kit, can you talk about your experience? Who were the candidates there and who was not there?
Well, first, this was in a small town. Well, it was in Chicago, but it was a neighborhood that was basically bordering Indiana. And as we all know, Indiana and a lot of small communities that are by Lake Michigan were once steel industries and corporations. And for a time, there was a large middle class, working class that was there, and they were surviving and thriving. But because of the certain laws and regulations that happened over time, people lost their jobs, and it became a struggle to earn an income and a livelihood. So, hold on, I'm just right now trying to roll up all the names right now of all the Democratic candidates that were there. Democratic candidates for governor are right now Senator Daniel Biss. We've interviewed him at least 4 times now. J.B. Pritzker, Theo Hardman, Scott Drury, and Bob Daber. However, 2 candidates were not there, and that was Chris Kennedy and Alderman Amar Pawar. And I will say this, they should have been there because
Chris Kennedy's been very quiet for a running official.
Yeah, it is. But see, the thing is...
And a Kennedy.
The thing is, though, especially at the end of the live stream that we did, the alderwoman who was hosting it, Susan Saldarowski Garza of the 10th Ward, she was saying thank you to all the candidates who were there. It was a very lively debate. Each one was talking about the issues that are affecting us, such as jobs, the Trump administration, of course, and the horrific tragedy in Charlottesville, education, the environment, cannabis legalization, which is one of my personal favorites. But at the end, she said at least you 5 came out here to talk to the people. And it was a huge crowd. There was a lot of people in there. There was at least 100 people in there listening to all 5 of the Democratic candidates who were running for governor. But there was an anger because they wanted to hear from Chris Kennedy and Alderman Amar Pawar, who was doing his own event at the same time. And the one thing that I took from that is I rewinded all the way back to the Democratic, or not the Democratic, but to the general election in 2016, where the Hillary Clinton campaign, they didn't visit Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, Iowa, all these Midwestern Red Belt state or Rust Belt states, and that cost her the election. And the thing is, let's say Chris Kennedy or Pawar were to get the nomination. If they're not willing to visit districts here in Illinois that are suffering, especially economically, that's going to cost them because people are going to say, like, well, how come you haven't shown up to debate? Where's your press conference? Why aren't you showing up to debate? Why aren't you debating your candidates? Why aren't you debating Biss or Pritzker or Drury or Daber or Hardman? Why aren't you doing this? Why aren't we hearing your policy or ideas? And that could turn people off from actually wanting to support you. And Illinois has a long, sad history of districts that were abandoned by the Democratic Party. We had, what's his name? Jim Waltz. Who's running for Congress.
Wirtz, right?
Waltz.
Waltz.
He's running for the 14th district. And, that area was abandoned by the Democrats for a very long time. And now you have this one guy who's a progressive who's trying to represent the policies and politics of Bernie Sanders and trying to bring that district to become a blue district again. And if you're running for office, you have to be at these debates. You have to be willing to sell yourself and tell the people why you are the better candidate. And Each one of the candidates were able to really bring out their policies. I noticed on the live chat there was really a lot of talk for Biss and Pritzker, the most. Senator Biss and Pritzker had at least a lot of people who supported them talking on our Facebook live chat. And if I had to make a personal opinion in regards to really who came out the strongest during that debate, I mean, we have to see more. But Senator Daniel Biss really stood out, as well as J.B. Pritzker. Those two were at least able to really push forward. Hardman comes in as a second. And Scott Drury and Bob Dabber, I have to see more from them in regards to really, speaking out and being active. I wish Chris Kennedy was there. And
I'm
Pawar.
mystified. I'm truly mystified by the fact that the only things we have heard so far, well, I've heard so far about Chris Kennedy is, one, the announcement that he was running, and two, a soundbite from an interview, and that is all I've heard. It's just weird that he's not being more out there and more vocal.
If that's the case, then he's not going to last long as a Democratic primary challenger, and the field will be dwindled down. Now, Biss and Pritzker, though, they have absolute huge following, and it's interesting to see where they stand. Senator Daniel Biss and Pritzker have both gone on the record to say that they are for cannabis legalization, as well as really making Illinois a blue state and really challenging Bruce Rauner's policies and politics. Because let's not forget, under Bruce Rauner's administration, Illinois has been suffering through a budgetary crisis. Now, of course, there's going to be people who are going to say, well, it also has to do with the Senate and House. But as governor, you are the chief executive and commander-in-chief of your said state. And if you're not willing to talk or have a debate with those who might be politically different from you, and you're willing to just put this state into a budgetary crisis, well, then the buck stops with you for causing this disaster.
He's taking pages right out of Trump's book, too, which
is
scary.
And I'll say this, all five of the Democratic candidates at the debate were not holding back in regards to saying that he's been silent about Trump. He's been silent about the budgetary crisis. He has been silent about policies and issues that have been implemented by the Trump administration.
And the people he's bringing in.
Yes, and the people he's bringing in. And also the fact that each one were condemned, the Democratic candidates condemned the horrific and brutal attacks that happened in Charlottesville. And they were expecting more from Bruce Rauner, but all of them said, well, what can you expect from a guy who's a billionaire, who's collecting huge paychecks from large private corporations? And this is a guy who's also putting in, Bruce Rauner himself, he's also putting people from the Breitbart organization into his administration as well. So what does that tell you about Bruce Rauner and his plans for Illinois? It's very narrow, and he's, I guess, trying to be Trump Jr., Trump Light, however you want to call it, but the Democratic candidates aren't holding back. They were very aggressive, all of them.
So would that make him peachy instead of orange if it was Trump light?
I don't know. I don't know.
Coral.
But let's look at what's happening here in Illinois. We have a budgetary crisis.
Yeah.
Our schools all across our state are suffering. Public schools are being cut. Public works aren't being implemented. Jobs are leaving.
When's the override vote supposed to take place?
I believe sometime in September.
Okay,
that's when it's supposed to happen. And when this primary is over, we will have a Democratic nominee. Now, who it is, I'm hoping that they will be aggressive enough to really challenge Bruce Rauner. I hope that they will be aggressive enough to go into districts that were abandoned by the Democrats, and also try and reach out to the Republicans and independents. Because let's not forget, 40% of Americans now identify themselves as independent. So if you are, whoever you are, to all the Democratic candidates who are running for governor, whoever you are, you have your work cut out for you, because you have to go out there and talk to all the people in Illinois. Because confidence in the state government is at an all-time low. We're just recovering from a budgetary crisis, and we need real leadership here in this state.
Kit, I need to ask a very serious question.
Yes.
Do you think it is a good strategy for any of these Democratic candidates to start wearing flannel shirts?
Oh, hold on, because see, now you open up that can of worms. I'm sorry, folks. Let's rewind back to any Democratic candidate.
Lumber sexuals.
Okay. Because I'll say this right here. Democratic candidates, they all kind of made fun of that whole flannel shirt that Bruce Rauner did. And listen, let's rewind back the clock to when Bruce Rauner was first running for governor, and that tacky, stupid, dumb commercial of him and his wife on there, and she says, "I'm a Democrat," and he says, "I'm a Republican. We don't agree on a lot of things, like politics." And then she says, "Or that shirt." Ah, ha, 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 ha. They're so down to earth and folksy. No, that was, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. It was
terrible.
It was tacky, and I could tell none of that conversation was real. It was scripted, and it was fake. And the Democratic candidates who were running for governor at the debate called it out, too. Because Bruce Rauner, what does he do? Does he drive in that pickup truck in that flannel shirt and visit hardworking, working-class neighborhoods? No. He's having champagne dinners with his donors, and he's willing to sit by and watch Illinois, a state that he's supposed to govern, collapse under his watch. He allowed this budgetary crisis to continue on. You could blame the Senate and House as much as you want, but the buck stops with him. He is the commander-in-chief. He's the governor of Illinois, and he allowed the state to fall into near disaster.
I'm putting this out there to anybody that's listening that has a service industry job. I want Bruce Rauner to be Romney'd. I want somebody to record him saying something about poor people, and so
he probably has. But going back to the Democratic candidates, though, from what I'm seeing is they're able to draw in large amounts of crowds. And ever since the 2016 election, with Trump being elected in office, people are starting to become more actively involved in politics. People want to know how the system works. And I think a lot of people who didn't vote or couldn't vote now want to vote and want to have somebody to represent their values and beliefs. And the Democrats have the opportunity right now to really win the governor's seat if they have the right candidate. So far, I'm just going to go back to what I say from the debate we covered today or on Tuesday. Senator Daniel Biss and J.B. Pritzker are looking like the two strong leads.
They're standing out.
Yeah, they're standing out the most. I mean, it's nothing against the other three. There is going to be another Democratic debate in October. We have yet to get the date, but Heartland's Media will be there. I can make that promise, and we will interview the candidates. I did actually some short 5-minute, 8-minute videos that are being uploaded on our YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter page. So as soon as you're done listening to us, check them out, get a chance to see who the candidates are. I'm only hoping that we have much more of a larger, vibrant conversation early on down the road. And I wish all the candidates to have a successful campaign, and hopefully we will get the strongest candidate. But again, Senator Biss and J.B. Pritzker really stood out as being the strong ones.
I have a question for you because I feel like we've heard relatively little out of Tio Hardiman, Scott Drury, and Bob, what's his name? Bob Dalber?
Yeah.
Daber?
Yeah, he's the only downstate Democrat candidate who's running for governor. And Tio Hardiman, he's actually ran for governor as well in the past, especially against Pat Quinn for the Democratic nomination. And he has he supports a progressive tax. He's a little hesitant for cannabis legalization, but he's not against it.
Then going to the subject of cannabis legalization, Cory Booker is now on the bandwagon trying to do something.
Yeah, I saw that a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that seems like a half-measure response to try and fix his image. A lot of progressives and Bernie-crats have a lot of things against Cory Booker and establishment Democrats, mostly due to the election fraud that was done against Bernie Sanders during the primary and especially during the DNC convention in Philadelphia. A lot of people don't like how Bernie Sanders was treated, and a lot of people didn't like the fact that Hillary Clinton was anointed as the nominee.
Well, people also don't like Cory Booker because it's well known that he has his major corporate donors are the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
And so it is strange that all of a sudden he is coming out in favor of federal legalization of cannabis. And you almost have to wonder, like, what pieces needed to fall into place for these pharmaceutical companies to be ready to go into the cannabis industry for their guy in...
It looks like a half-measure response. It looks like a half-measure response to try and fix his image.
Just an image thing?
I don't think he'll really he says he supports it. That's great. But are you on the political? Do you have the political history and backing of saying that yes, I'm for cannabis legalization? Senator Bernie Sanders was for cannabis legalization and decriminalization.
Well, see, here's the thing about the cannabis legalization thing and the drug industry. I used to manage a health food store, and I won't say its names. I'll just give its initials, GNC, and back in the day, they had these diet pills with an herb in there called ephedra. And yeah. And I would always tell people, don't take this, if you have heart problems and stuff like that. But there were those people that were still selling that to people who had heart problems. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Ephedra was eventually criminalized to a point. But a lot of that was due to the pharmaceuticals. It was actually safe if used properly.
Yeah, it's a Chinese herb called ma wang.
Yeah,
and it was a stimulant herb that people would use in weight loss preparations. But there were people who were just using it very irresponsibly.
Yeah, and the number of deaths to ephedra compared to the deaths to cigarettes and other things like that was minimal, at least. But because the pharmaceuticals kept the spotlight on those deaths, it ended up, and the pharmaceutical company, then all of a sudden you're seeing the pharmaceutical companies come out with their own diet products.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and there was a lot going on at that time. With different diet products that were coming out. So many of the diet treatments that came out themselves had serious problems, and particularly in terms of the way could affect somebody's heart. There was a lot going on at that point.
Yeah, I had always told people, if you have heart problems, I went through the laundry list. Don't take this if.
Well, and that's often true that the consumers also don't always use
common sense.
And there was a case 20, maybe 30 years ago, where a woman was drinking vast amounts of a so-called diet tea that contained senna, which is a laxative.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
And she was drinking 11 cups a day and eventually died. And her husband went on this rampage. And while it is true that the preparation probably was not the best thing in the world to be giving out to people, at the same time, she was really drinking a lot of it, a lot more than was prescribed, that was recommended on the box. So that can happen.
Yeah.
But
my thing is that with the legalization of marijuana, the pharmaceuticals might just hijack marijuana the same way.
Well, and that is a very very real concern.
Sorry.
And you've also and absolutely. So yeah, if somebody has an idea, and then all of a sudden, let's see how we can make money out of it.
Well, let's look at Colorado, for example. They have a budgetary surplus, something Illinois desperately needs. And if we look back at the candidates right now, they're all for cannabis legalization, or at least some of them are. There's some are a little more hesitant than others, but there is a serious issue that should cannabis, for example, and this isn't just an overall issue, but it is an important issue, that should it be legalized here in the state of Illinois, will we also decriminalize it? What will we do to help out the individuals who are in jail because they were either holding it or selling it? And what will be done to protect our state rights from Jeff Sessions and the Trump administration, who want to reignite the war on drugs and institute harsher policies and bringing back failed organizations like DARE, for example.
And there are after effects of the legalization. Yeah. Case in point, a certain quarterback from the Broncos, who is no longer there as a quarterback, owned his own Papa John's franchise. And right after cannabis was legalized, his profits shot up.
Oh, of course it will.
His profits shot up people make fun of the munchies, but it was a visible thing right after that.
Well, let's look at the good. Well, right now here in the state of Illinois, there are two bills, and we actually had one of the state senators who's supporting cannabis legalization for recreational use, Senator Heather Steins. That's SB 316, and then there's House Bill 2353, which is basically calling for recreational marijuana to be legalized here in our state, which would be great because then we can actually stop imprisoning people. Mm-hmm. We could use the revenue that's collected to not only help out the pensions, but rebuild public works and help our police forces, cut their time from targeting people who are selling cannabis or using cannabis products,
and create a whole new generation of songwriters.
Oh, and plus, let's look at what it can do economically as well. It could fund our public schools. It could be used to really make people's lives that much easier, and our state will no longer be in a budgetary crisis. We'll also have a budgetary surplus. So if that's something that interests you, if you're listening, check out SB 316 and House Bill 2353, and if you like it, call up your local state representative, your state senator, and say, hey, please support these bills because we need a budgetary surplus. And let's also going back to the original subject, the Democratic candidates who are running for governor. Some of them are saying they're supporting for cannabis. I know Senator Daniel Biss said he's on board for cannabis legalization. J.B. Pritzker said so. So I mean, if you like what they're saying too, check out their campaign sites, check them out, and get involved.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a little rant.
Yeah, well, just to get on the subject of taxing things, what do you think about the newest player in the sugar tax? Soda tax thing.
We've been talking a lot about that.
But the latest, I saw the commercial finally today from.
What's the commercial?
Who was it? From New York, Bloomberg.
Bloomberg.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
yeah, and it's like people from other states are coming to Chicago, putting money into this soda tax thing, and I'm like.
Yeah, I saw something on the Sun Times yesterday. I was walking along. I didn't have time to read it. But why is Bloomberg putting money into?
He wants to. I think he wants to encourage the tax and let people give it time because he thinks that it could do more good.
Oh yeah, I mean I know that New York was putting some limitations on on big gulps.
Yeah.
Yes, the size of your drink. It is. I tend to have I don't drink soda. One of the things that kind of irritates me about this whole mess is that they're not distinguishing between no-calorie or low-calorie sweeteners and high-calorie sweeteners, which I think is something to consider in this situation.
And then the other thing too is flavored waters.
Mm-hmm. Well, the flavored waters are not under the tax. What happened though was that there were some retailers like Walgreens that were putting the tax on unsweetened flavored waters when they were not supposed to. But I think that got worked out. But then we reported last week that many of the retailers were not set up to handle the tax for people who were using food stamp benefits. So the county came up with a workaround that would basically refund the tax, but then the feds got in and said, no, you can't do that, and we're going to withhold your food stamp funds if you keep doing it. It was just kind of a mess. I'm not a fan. I continue to point out that University of Liverpool study, the best way to incentivize healthy eating habits is to promote and to provide people with funds to buy healthy food. That was established as being the best way of going about this. We start really getting into some we're getting into some areas where you're making real judgment calls about what people are eating and drinking, and I think that has its own problem when you're taxing foods that poor consumers are buying and making them pay extra. That's an issue. At the same time, there was a study done a while back that showed that people were consuming about 20% of their daily calories in the form of caloric beverages. And that in and of itself can be something that helps people, that if you can control the calories in beverages, you might be able to help people control their calorie intake.
Well, the other problem I have with that tax is the fact that they also tax sports drinks. And some of these sports drinks do have benefits, and I'm like,
yeah, they do have benefits.
I'm like, why are you taxing something that actually has a benefit to it?
And fruit, some fruit juices.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, fruit juice in and of itself is controversial. The American Academy of Pediatrics has come down pretty hard on it. Mm-hmm. Basically saying that children, I think it's under the age of 1 or 2, I think now there's no reason for them to have fruit juice, and that you should limit fruit juice. And with older children, they should be encouraged to eat a whole piece of fruit. But again, some people that is what they choose to drink.
Yeah.
And they like it. And when you have, again, when you're not distinguishing between the types of sweeteners, you've got, in my opinion, your claim that this is about health is severely weakened. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm going to say on that topic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, and you just can't involve yourself in other people's lives,
All right. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be back for the second hour. And we have much to discuss.
Much to discuss.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
All right, and we are back, and we're going to be talking this last hour about the topic of the hour, the day, the week, and may end up being the year. Well, the way this year's been going,
who knows?
This may be a blip on the radar.
At least the month.
Don't jinx us.
All right, so we knew last Friday that there had been some protests that were starting in Charlottesville. There was a particularly disturbing specter of some counter-protesters, a very small group, around a statue of Thomas Jefferson. They were being surrounded by white supremacists, open white supremacists, people, Nazis, people identifying with
weapon carrying,
and tiki torch carrying. Had surrounded them, and I was here. I saw stuff that was going on in churches. Churches were having services. They were blessing the counter-protesters. Clergy came out there, and they were being surrounded. And it sounded like also the church buildings were being
synagogues
were being surrounded. It was a very frightening situation. But we weren't getting a lot of those stories yet. We came in here to the studio. We did our show last week, and at the end of the show, we did bring up that things were getting very heated in Charlottesville. And then on my way back with our guest co-hosts, Michael Corliam and Kat O'Connor, we were all on the bus together. We're looking at our phones, and we see that a car had plowed into a group of protesters, killing one woman, injuring, I believe, 19 others, some of them very severely. Later on in the day, we found out that 2 troopers were killed when their helicopter went down. These were state troopers. I believe they were state troopers that were monitoring the event. These 2 gentlemen, these officers, were killed. And then everything just got worse and proceeded.
People started opening their mouths.
Among other things. But things just began to unfold in some incredibly ugly ways, some very positive ways as well. Mm-hmm. People began to stand up and say that this is enough. No. This is not who we are. This is not who we want to be. That racism is systemic. We understand that it is systemic. Sometimes it's not conscious, but it's something that we want to overcome because we want to be better than this, and we started to see that. But what happened, of course, is that Donald Trump did not respond quickly. Or he did. He made some remarks on Twitter, and eventually he did respond. He appeared to.
Melania was the first one to respond.
Yeah,
I know.
She responded, but then there were we started getting these back and forth. That there was violence on both sides, and there were some very fine people on both sides. Now we've been looking at some of the so-called very fine people. Among with
the bulletproof jackets on
and the weapons and the Nazi salutes, and people who have a lot of very nasty things to say about women and people of color and Jews. And then things just started really spinning with long-term implications. And one of the things that happened was that there was a particularly repulsive fascist news site called the Daily Stormer. Put up by a guy named Andrew Anglin, who previously was a left-wing vegan who had a penchant for banging his head on things. And that makes me wonder, in fact, if he didn't do some brain damage. He is supposedly now out of the United States, living in Nigeria, of all places.
Is he a prince?
Well, some of the scams that he's been pulling, but his website has always been disgusting. It is simply disgusting. He put up a particularly vile attack on Heather Heyer, the young woman who was killed, who was murdered. I'm going to say it. Yeah. Murder by that vehicle. It was incredibly vile what he had to say about her. Everything was vile about it. And GoDaddy, which is his web host, which has always been pretty hardcore libertarian freedom of speech, which is not entirely a bad thing, but they said enough's enough. We're not going to host. And then it appears that Andrew Anglin faked Anonymous taking over his site, saying, well, Anonymous has taken over the site, and now I need to raise money because the Jewish cabal is after me, and I need to raise money to keep the site going. But people were looking at the site. When Anonymous or a hacker group takes over a site, they usually just take down the whole site. They put up their own thing. Well, it was this little tiny section, but all of his content, the really vile content, was still up there. So many people believe that, in fact, Anonymous did not take over the site. And then something even more interesting happened. A company called Cloudflare, which provides cloud services for websites, which helps people protect against attacks against their site. It helps people keep their content up online, decided that they were no longer going to serve as the cloud for the Daily Stormer. And it was actually some very frank talk from the CEO of Cloudflare, which I have to admire him for. He sent out a memo, and he said, "This is an arbitrary decision. I woke up this day in a bad mood, and I'm taking this down." He said, "Yeah, I understand the danger in doing this." And one of the things that he brought up in his company blog was that when you have the control of cloud support for websites that keeps them from being taken down, and it's in the hands of a couple of companies or a handful of companies, what that effectively means is that once those companies pull out, you are going to be on your own, and this is going to, in and of itself, create a second tier, a couple of tiers for the internet. Who gets to see what content? And he pointed out the real danger of what he was doing. This has long-term implications. Paul, you're our IT guy. I'd like to talk about this a little bit. We're going to go on to other things, but as always, the media has covered a lot of this stuff. Our listeners are smart people, and they can find the information. But I want to go through some of the short-term and long-term implications of what happened this weekend, how it affected our country and our world in every area, including business and the internet.
Well, so yeah, Cloudflare is a authoritative DNS provider, and they're going to protect against denial of service attacks, and they're going to make sure that people get to your website.
What is a denial of service attack?
So it's usually called DDoS, so it's a distributed denial of service attack. It's usually a coordinated effort either by bots or by a group of hackers who target an individual host or website and just feed it page requests like ad nauseum from multiple different sources constantly, which in effect makes the site inaccessible. Because if you're a real person trying to get to www.thiswebsite.com and some hacker group has decided to target it with a DDoS attack, you're not going to be able to reliably get through to that site. You may have to hit that refresh button a zillion times before you can get any part of the page to load. And it just cripples websites. So this type of protection that Cloudflare offers for websites, keeps them functioning and keeps them viable for anyone who wants to visit the site.
Okay.
And so by removing these protections, what the CEO of Cloudflare was saying was that he had been receiving requests from basically activist hackers for a while, for long before Charlottesville, saying, "Hey, would you guys drop your protection of Daily Stormer? We want to take them down." And it's like, no, they're our client. Like, I know you don't like what they're saying. We don't like what they're saying, but this is America, and we respect free speech rights here, and they have a right to say it. And that's where I think things kind of flipped when the CEO wrote this memo. And he started saying, America is a little bit unique in our view on freedom of speech. Like, we hold it so highly that we allow really vile speech to come out. And if you look at anything the Daily Stormer has ever written, I can't point to a single thing they've written that has any amount of integrity to it. It's
or
just
any peace. I've never heard of a peaceful Nazi or a peaceful Klans member. Remember, what happened in Charlottesville, all right, was a terrorist attack. You got to call it as that. Woman was murdered, cold-blooded. That guy did it on purpose. There's another video of him speeding his car. The video that we all seen is just the car just ramming in. There's another video at the end, far end, where you see his car zooming down the street. Its full intense purpose into running over those people. Those people being the protesters, the counter-protesters against the Klansmen and the Nazis. They're not the alt-right. Call them what they are. They are right-wing extremist groups who have only one point of view, and that's the extermination of anyone and anything that doesn't fit their point of view. They don't like anybody else that's not them. And
they're like Daleks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. But you got to remember, too, yes, freedom of speech and tolerance of other people's ideas, but we don't have to be tolerant for intolerance. Because as soon as you give the Nazis and the Klansmen a seat of power, they will use everything in their power to basically silence everyone else. They don't want to have a peaceful debate or dialogue. They don't want to have a peaceful conversation. They just want their view and their point of and their world. Remember, during World War II, the Nazis conquered independent sovereign countries. They exterminated people within their own population that they didn't feel fit their point of view, and there was no peaceful way to really handle the Nazi Empire. There was only one way, and we had to defeat them.
And the response to this is like none I've seen in my lifetime. So many groups have gone after these Nazis. CEOs,
yes,
people that run businesses. The only thing that hasn't gone after these neo-Nazis, alt-right people, are bugs because they had citronella torches. That's the only thing.
But what I want to point out something here that this is that Cloudflare was one corporate response, which was very, very direct, but there were also a bunch of corporate leaders, CEOs, who left Trump's manufacturing council, and eventually Donald Trump actually. Well, I was going to close it. He just closed it. Yeah, I was going to close it. And then insulting the CEO of Merck and about over pharmaceutical prices. So then that happens. So
they're all losers.
Yeah, they're exactly. Yeah. So that's happening, which I thought was pretty astonishing. That the corporations were coming forward and just saying, no, we're hearing from our people and our customer base, and no, we're not going to go for that. And then of course his arts council. I don't know if you guys saw that when his arts council. Not only did they resign, but they very carefully crafted a resignation letter. Where if you look at the first letter of each paragraph, they spell out resist.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
You didn't see that? Oh,
no.
yeah. You have. If you look at the letter, look at every paragraph, the first letter of every paragraph, and it says resist, which is really kind of giving the finger. And he said, of course, I was going to close it anyways. Shut it down anyways. Who needs art? Oh, by the way, and he and the first lady are going to skip the Kennedy Center honors. For concerns of a political distraction, which is probably
the only art that I need is the stuff hanging in Mar-a-Lago, including that picture that I bought of myself.
Okay, here's one issue we got to remember about Donald Trump. The people in Charlottesville, those people voted for him, especially when I mean by them, like the Nazis and the Klansmen that were there, the white supremacists that were there. Trump encouraged all those people to come out of the woodwork during the primary and general election. A lot of those people voted for him. He was talking about building a wall. He was talking about having a Muslim registry.
And after this all happened, after Charlottesville, they were all talking about how that's our president.
Yeah.
And it's like...
Well, and when he gave his very late and lukewarm rebuke...
And then his anti-rebuke, and then his anti-rebuke.
You saw white supremacists openly saying, "Well, this is very good.
Yeah,
his response is very good, and we're feeling empowered by this." You did see members of his own party who pretty much said enough is enough. Although I did, Paul Ryan said something and tweeted about white supremacy being a horrible thing, and John Legend wrote to him and tweeted back and said, "Impeach him or." shut up.
Yeah.
So I don't know if anybody in the Republican Party is going to get a backbone.
The 2018 election is going to be so interesting after everything
the
that's
midterm election cycle will be a very important cycle to cover.
But something else happened.
What?
Something else happened, and that is the supposed resignation of Steve Bannon. And I say supposed, and I am willing to be open to correction on this. I'm willing to be open to debate and to argument. And I've already been argued with on this, and I'm not going to, I'm not going to...
But he's my bestest friend.
Well, the thing is that one of my main concerns with people like Sebastian Gorka and Steve Bannon is, all right, if they're actually in official positions, there's a certain amount of scrutiny that can happen. Take them out of those positions, what can they do? Now, my friend Michael Corlin on our show last week, very smart guy, and said, no, Trump really cannot fake his indignation. He's not smart enough. He doesn't have enough self-control to do this, to go along with this, and that could very well be. But, so the way it's being framed right now is that Steve Bannon is out. He has gone right back to Breitbart. There's he was like within hours, he was back on Breitbart.
It's like I never.
And then people are saying that
left.
Breitbart is now going to declare war on President Trump. It's something worth watching, but I think that we also want to keep in mind that Donald Trump had a successful reality show. And there's nothing particularly real or unscripted about reality shows.
Right.
So I'm urging everybody to keep their eye on this, but to also maintain some distance, and that things may not be as they say.
Let's just say this. Breitbart can influence Trump just like Russia has influenced Trump. There is no way that Bannon leaving... I'm saying this right now. There's no way that Bannon leaving will change anything.
To me, it seems more like an optics play.
Yeah.
They didn't really line up with their comments on Charlottesville, and I think this was Trump's reaction to that.
Yeah.
I don't think it was. I think Kelly is the one who probably said, "Mr. President, he has to go," but I don't want him to go. Well, he really has to go. Yeah. Oh, okay. Hey, Bannon, I'll talk to you later. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That kind of thing.
That very well could be what's going
wink,
on.
Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
But the thing is, too, the actions of Charlottesville and the response from the Nazis and the Ku Klux Klan and how they are going to still continue doing protests and protecting Confederate symbols, a lot of people are angry about it. People are not just going to sit down and let this happen. And the thing is, if you're the commander-in-chief of a whole country, you need to realize that there's a lot of people who don't like the Klan or the Nazis or what they represent, and people are saying in one voice, it's not going to happen here, and we will show up. Harlan's Media did a Facebook live stream of one of the protests on Wednesday, I believe. No, it was on Monday. And we covered the protest. In fact, there were 3 other protests following that protest against Trump and his administration and for his lackluster response for the horrific attack that happened in Charlottesville. So people of all groups, political groups, ideologies, and different backgrounds are all standing together. They don't want the Nazis or the Klansmen to have a seat in power, because we've all seen that story when those guys sit in power. It's not pretty, and the only way to defeat those guys was through warfare.
Now, I have said this, I guess, ever since my first ever show on News What News, 4 to 6 Tuesdays here on 1680 AM, Que4.org. But I think that I have said this ever since the first show that I did, and that is, whenever you have Republican control of all of, we have a history in the United States of this happening. This is not the first time that this has happened, where all of a sudden the KKK comes out and out of nowhere, and where abortion clinics get bombed and the alt-right starts using violence, and it always happens in cycles, and the cycle happens to coincide with a big conservative Republican voice. And if you think it's there's no coincidence about it.
Yeah.
That's me.
Well, I mean, let's look at the voting base right now, especially those that really support Donald Trump. But when you see all these right-wing extremists who are saying Trump is with us, well, the GOP really needs to take a step back and realize, well, who do we really represent and what are we trying to do? Because a lot of people, I mean, good luck to the GOP for trying to reach out to minority or working class communities.
That'll never happen anymore.
Or the LGBTQ community. I mean, I don't see anyone from those communities, especially in large numbers, to say, yeah, I am a Republican. I just don't see that happening. It's a total rebranding that they'll have to do.
Caitlyn Jenner, I don't get. I mean, now Caitlyn Jenner has finally come out against Donald Trump, but Caitlyn Jenner and Omarosa, I don't get those two. Why they are feeding into this,
well, they're in their own little bubble. Remember, they have a lot of money.
Yeah, it's cognitive dissonance. I mean, think about people like Phyllis Schlafly. Who fought against equal rights for women.
Oh, I'm sorry, she's dead.
But then her son, who is gay, came out as gay. Yeah. Her son came out as gay, and now he's still doing the work that she started. I mean, he's this gay conservative who's who's done this. So,
yeah.
Oh, by the way,
self-loathing.
Donald J. Trump did thank Steve Bannon this morning at 6:33 a.m. and I'm sure he was happily enthroned where he is.
Is that Eastern or Central Time?
I don't know, but it says, I want to thank Steve Bannon for his service. He came to the campaign during my run against crooked Hillary Clinton. It was great.
Oh, God.
Thanks, S.
He is so obsessed with Hillary.
He's obsessed with a lot of things. But this is... I was delighted to see some of the energy, and I will say it seemed to me this week people were being a little kinder to each other. Mm-hmm. I don't know about you guys, but I mean, I was walking around. I mean, I think of Chicago actually as being a fairly friendly city for a big city of our size. I think we're actually a pretty friendly city. Mm-hmm. But what I was really noticing this week is people were taking some extra time to be gentle with other people. Kinder, more smiles, more thank yous, you're welcome, have a nice day, that sort of thing. So I think that is, that's a ray of hope in this. But don't make no mistake, there's going to be a hard slog here, because I think that the hard right here, when I'm talking about the hard right, I'm talking about those that have hateful tendencies. And I think the word hate is overused. I think we use the word hate, we throw that word around
negative
a lot, and I think it diminishes its impact. But there are some people who are simply hateful people who have a particular animus toward a certain group and they want to exterminate them. I call that hate. They've been dealt, I think, in many ways a serious blow here. Remember Christopher Cantwell, the crying Nazi?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's funny.
There are multiple videos of him. There's one of him, and he did one when he was afraid of the police, and he's crying and sniveling. There's another one, though. They're pouring Pepto-Bismol or whatever it is into his, or Mylanta, or whatever the stuff that they put in your eyes to get rid of the tear gas. And he's going, I got maced. And somebody says, well, who did it? Who did it? And he said, communists. Twice in 2 days. Poor baby. And then they found that he had been writing dating tips.
Oh God!
And for OkCupid, somebody actually went in and took that. OkCupid took down his profile, and they said, if you find any white supremacists on this site, let us know. We'll take down the profile. But he had written a list of dating tips, and he was going on about the difficulties he had finding a decent woman.
Tip number one: don't be a racist.
Well, yeah, he said something along the lines of, I've had to deal with fake photographs. Oh, come on, guy. He said, I've had fake police reports filed on me. Really now?
Oh,
and
boy.
the coup de grace there for me was that he had breast milk sprayed on him. Now there's a story there, and I kind of like to know what happened. But I mean, this guy was just made into everybody made a complete fool of him. So we've got.
I think he made a fool of himself. We've got
a bunch of guys who have lost their jobs. because we've had that, and I think that they've really. I think that hard right has really been dealt a strong blow, but that's not going to stop them from coming back, particularly if there's reason to believe, and many people do believe, that there's some big money behind them, and that if Bannon is back at Breitbart, I don't know. And
before we went on the show, I had mentioned this, that I think America's gone. As I said, America's gone through stuff like this before. But I think America has had so much that now America has gone to the point of the F this S. I can't repeat the words, but I'm like, F this S point in America where they just had so much and they're just tired and they want it gone. And they're like, that's it. The line's been crossed. We've kept moving the line and we kept moving the line, but this line is, we can't move it any further. This is it. We've had enough.
Well, let's look at the big picture in regards to what the Confederate flag and the Nazi flag represent. They represent hatred and extermination and enslavement. And the fact that you now have so many people of different backgrounds standing together, uniting against the extreme racists that are now hitting the streets. It shows that people are tired of it and they don't want history to repeat itself, okay? And you got enough people who are angry and upset. But we have to remember, this has been going on, like you said, for a very long time. And people of color had to deal with this for a very long time. These Confederate monuments that were built, they were built after the Civil War. Yeah. Can you imagine going to school or walking down the street and seeing this Confederate monument? It is a thing of fear and intimidation that people of color had to deal with for a very long time, and this is the straw, especially Donald Trump becoming president. It's a straw that broke a lot of people's backs.
You saw though, it is, and if you saw what happened in Durham, North Carolina, where was it North Carolina? Well, it was in Durham.
I think it was in South Carolina.
South Carolina, okay, Durham, South Carolina. A group of people took down a Confederate statue, and a woman was arrested. The next day, over 200 people lined up at the police department to turn themselves in for the crime.
I think Durham's in North Carolina.
And it's North Carolina. Okay, right, North Carolina. But yeah, it was just remarkable to see this kind of resistance that is happening.
My favorite, though, has to be Baltimore.
Oh yeah,
they pulled a Meigs Field.
Yeah, they take it out in the middle of the night.
And do you want to know where the statues are right now being held at? They're by a water waste treatment facility. That's
weird.
Yeah, that's where they're at. But the thing is, what are Confederate statues and monuments doing in Baltimore? I mean, Baltimore is a northern state. Why have a statue to a Confederate general, a rebel, a traitor to the Union? We don't like losers. We only like winners. Why do we have Confederate symbols in the northern states? Why build them? Well, here's one thing: intimidation, Jim Crow, racism, segregation. And the fact that people of color had to deal with that for a very long time, it's finally people are standing up and saying, no, get these monuments out of the public streets. Put real monuments of real patriots and heroes who fought for everyone and everything.
And people who actually did constructive things in the southern states.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, now that I get a chance to be on the show with you guys, Kit, speaking of people having enough, do you think the military in general has had enough of Trump too? Well, here's
well, I mean, there are plenty of veterans who are against the war in Iraq. There are plenty of veterans who are now, Democrats and progressives. But there are also some, veterans who are Republicans too. I mean,
because I could hear the straws breaking the camel's back when he decided that transgenders were no longer going to be allowed in the military. And I kind of, the backlash on that was kind of, including people that are still in the military.
The one thing this president needs to realize is the last group you need to fight is the military-industrial complex, or do anything that's going to stop their business or stop the way they run things, okay? Mm-hmm. They are... Remember, our military is not a draft force anymore. It's a volunteer force. And the last thing you need is the commander-in-chief to say, well, this military is only going to have certain types of people in it. Well, who are you going to recruit? You got to recruit into these. The main job of recruiters is to go into locations and to recruit people to join up into the service. But if you're basically going to have a president who's going to say this group is going to be discriminated against, this group is going to be discriminated, you can't join or fight for this country. Well, then what's the whole point of serving this country? And a lot of military generals and admirals realize that, and this is a huge damage to them. And I think if something's got to give to where even everyone is going to say Trump has got to be impeached. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can impeach him now, but it hasn't gotten to that point yet. I'm surprised that it hasn't.
Well,
but, I mean, there's a lot of things leading up to it, but Trump, remember, he's alienated. Like I mentioned earlier, he's alienating himself from his allies and even people from in his own cabinet. It's only a matter of time before this collapses on its own weight, and the military is kind of having. Well,
one of the things that I've mentioned on my show is that around the time Trump was elected, Robert Reich tweeted that he had a conversation with an anonymous congressman, Republican congressman, who said, we want to use Donald Trump as long as we can to get what we want,
and that's basically tax cuts,
and that's why he's still here. It's because they're not finished with him. They want to chew him up and spin him out. That's basically.
But the thing is, Trump is going to go by their timeline. He's going to go by his own timeline. This is a guy who doesn't understand the meaning of no. This is a guy who doesn't understand the meaning of what another person feels or thinks. He doesn't care. The only person Donald Trump cares about is himself and his family and his business. That's it. Mm-hmm. And you know what? I understand why some of these racist extremists voted for Trump, because they could see a little bit of themselves in him. But the thing is, as a commander-in-chief, as president, that's only going to stand for so long, because as soon as you have the entire populace hate you. Remember, in the Prince and the Discourses, Nick Machiavelli said this: if you had to choose between two options to be loved or feared, it's better to be feared, because then people won't mess with you. But if you're hated and you have the entire populace against you, you have no standing power at all. And Donald Trump is very hated. His approval rating is going down further every single day. And look at the people who he associates himself with. These white extremists, these white racists, they support Trump. They like the fact that he's willing to stick his neck out for Confederate monuments and their right for hate speech. And a lot of Americans don't like that. They don't want it. They don't want this country to go down the way of Nazi Germany.
Has anybody checked Trump's poll numbers?
Not recently.
Why don't you give those, if you can, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's at 34 or 32, something like that.
But, also bringing down something a little bit closer to home, I mean, let's look at these Confederate monuments. Why are they still up? The purpose of them to be built was for intimidation. They were built after the war. And just for everyone to understand this, when the Civil War was over, General Robert E. Lee said about the Confederate flag, wrap it up. It's done. It's over. No need to fly it anymore. Okay, and that's the guy who basically signed a surrender. You didn't hear him saying, keep on flying the rebel flag. No, he was done. So if that guy said it's done, then it's done. It's over. And not to galvanize anything about Robert E. Lee, but that's what he said about the Confederate flag. So all these guys waving that flag and all these guys waving the Nazi flag, wrap it up. It's done.
You lost.
Yeah, it's over. It's over.
But they're clearly not doing that.
They're clearly not going to do that.
This may seem to be absurd, but in fact, they are not doing that. And you have certain media outlets that are fanning flames of discontent that seem to be, in some cases, egging on for a race war.
That's what I was worried about.
Yeah, I mean, there's this egging on. Let's just try and poke at people so that they do things. You get some bad optics, and whoosh.
Yeah, but
now and whoosh. Now people start changing their minds. At the very least, they're not going to start goose stepping. But what they could very easily start doing is saying, well, we believe that they have free speech, or maybe they have a point, or maybe we're going to start listening to certain individuals who don't identify. We're saying we don't believe in violence, but we want to look at these IQ scores over here.
They need to send them to Alaska. There's plenty of acreage in Alaska, okay? And they're that much
bears.
closer to Russia.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Look, the whole idea of being tolerant for intolerance is a foolhardy mistake. I wouldn't do it. Like I said before, as soon as you give those guys power, they're going to take more of it away and start implementing their very harsh and tyrannical and violent policies upon people who don't agree with them. Mm-hmm. And these Confederate monuments, they got to go. Tear them down. They've long served their time. Get them out of here.
What you got for us, Paul?
So, Gallup's most recent poll, President Trump job approval, has his approval rating at 38, disapproval at 57. Rasmussen has his approval at 42, also disapproval at 57. I wanted to piggyback on this, though, too. I think there are a couple of salient things we haven't really touched on yet. In the wake of Charlottesville, it's reignited a couple of interesting things. We're talking a little bit about the limits of freedom of speech. We talk a little bit about tactics for those of us who disagree with ethno-nationalists and neo-Nazis. It's not a difficult position to take. Yeah. I don't like Nazis. I don't like what they stand for. I don't like the KKK. I don't like what they stand for. It's not a difficult ideology to rebuff. And yet, I find myself talking with people who hold that position, which is a perfectly reasonable position to hold, who also say, we need to go out and we need to start punching Nazis. We need to be violent. And I go, I'm hesitant to go there. And I say, imagine if what happened in Charlottesville was the opposite. Imagine instead of a white supremacist running his car into a group of counter-protesters, injuring 19 and killing 1, imagine if it was one of these anti-fascists who decided to drive a car into this demonstration of white nationalism. First of all, that guy would be dead. All those guys have guns.
Yeah.
But second, the optics would be horrible, right? Now, when people are saying, oh, these Antifa guys, they're so violent, and I go, most of what we see from them is not violent. There are a few fringe people that do some things that aren't great. But as soon as you have a guy driving a car into a group of protesters, no matter how odious their stance is, their ideology is, it's still second-degree murder. It's not good for optics. The other thing I wanted to point out is this same thing plays out with regard to calling for people to identify people from the photos and get them fired from their jobs, right? That's a really difficult one, because if you align with the ideological left, usually you're going to be on board with unions, and unions don't like what is it called? At will employment. Yeah, employment. The ability for either the employee or the employer to terminate employment at any time for any reason, and that's because it gives more power to the employer, right? Mm-hmm. It gives a lot more power to the employer. But here we are asking for employers to exercise that right because of the political leanings of people that we've identified from news photographs.
Now,
that's a dangerous. I mean,
I understand where you're coming from in regards to that, but let's remember what these guys, their intention to do. It was to cause harm and violence. I mean, they're the ones coming in body armor. They're the ones coming with AR-15s, M16A2s, M4 carbines. They're the ones there armed to the teeth, protected by the police, mind you. And they're saying that certain groups like Jews will not replace us. And I'm sorry, but this is one of the things that they were saying. They were talking about extermination. They were talking about how this is a white nation and that they are willing to do anything possible to preserve it. And they're willing to cross that line of violence first because that's their ideology. That's a Nazi and Confederate ideology. And a lot of people feel threatened by these guys, and the fact that these individuals, I apologize for that slip up. These individuals who are promoting this hate speech are dangerous, and a lot of people don't want them working in areas where they can hurt people.
I wholeheartly agree. And I just think these tactics could be better.
And then there's also the whole idea of them allowing the speech. Well, their speech is intolerance, and if they were ever to one day have absolute power, they're going to silence everyone. That's their end game goal, and then have their world and their point of view only.
I think Paul, there's the issue of at will employment. Do we really want to use that tool? And I'm not actually taking a side on it. I'm just saying that that do we really want to be using that tool against others? And there's also the very real concern of saying that the only people who can function within a society are those who subscribe to a certain ideology. Now, this is a particularly atrocious ideology, one that has no redeeming features whatsoever. But the importance of making things very, very clear where we're going to draw those lines and establishing them before we start using ideology against people in this way. One thing that I will say is this. One concern that a lot of First Amendment absolutists have is that if you set a precedent for going after somebody for certain types of speech, that precedent can be used against anybody, like Paul was discussing earlier. And the one thing about certain types of activism like this is that you can do an end run around the state or court setting up that standard. And you can simply say, okay, we're going to use the free market. And we're going to say, we're going to use what we have here, which is to go to employers and say, hey, you're free to hire or fire whoever you want, but we don't want to go to your business if you've got this person working there. And so when this happens, there is no court precedent being set that governs speech.
Now, here's the free speech thing about employment. I'm thinking if you could be fired because you identify with a certain business and you're on Facebook and you write something about that business, if that could happen, then yeah, you could be fired for being a racist. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're saying something hateful against your employer, and you're bringing something hateful into your place of work, the whole ideology of master race and all that, you know.
Well, I wouldn't want that in the workplace, and I would say that even if you had some kind of job protections, I mean, my position would be like yours. It would be from a human resources position. Mm-hmm. I can't have a functioning workplace,
right,
when I've got somebody at this desk over here, 40 hours a week,
sexual harassment rules,
who doesn't believe that women belong in the workplace, who doesn't believe that black people should have the right to a job, who believes that, who upholds Nazi standards. That's going to disrupt the workplace if that person's publicly spouting that. And one could make that argument. But I also, as I said, this is a very delicate issue, because what we do know is that when a law goes into place, when a regulation goes into place, or when you have a court precedent that goes into place, it can be weaponized against anybody, depending on who happens to be wielding that weapon.
I think let's rewind back from this conversation when, Darren, you mentioned people have had enough. People don't want it to happen again anymore. And this is the power of the public and their voice, and where the public really views the Nazi symbol, the Nazi ideology, and the Confederate symbol and the Confederate ideology. People don't want it there. Times are changing, and the thing is that we've seen the disaster in the past. What happens when the Confederates or the Nazis have their ideology enforced, and people want to stop before it happens. People don't feel comfortable going to a business or a job where there is a neo-Nazi or a Klansman right there next to them. People know right then and there what that person thinks and feels, and it's a very narrow-minded point of view, and it's very disgusting, and some people just be like, no, I will refuse business here. I won't take anything from you if you have this person here. And this is a very dangerous and horrific ideology. And, of course, listen, there are protections for employees, but if you're going to have somebody there who is promoting hate speech and genocide and ethno cleansing, I got a problem with that person. And I know what that and the fact is that you can have freedom of speech here in this country. That's great. But I'm not going to tolerate intolerance, because the point of these ideologies is that they get rid of everyone that doesn't agree with them, and they are a serious danger. What happened in Charlottesville was a terrorist action, and these guys now are planning marches in Boston, L.A., and other areas, and they think they could get away with it and force people to stay down, and people are going to stand up and say, no, we are not going to sit down. We saw what happened in Germany when people were silent, because as soon as they went after any group, I'm going to mess up the quote, but when the Nazis came after the Jews, I didn't speak up, for I was not Jewish. When the Nazis came after Freemasons, I didn't speak up because I wasn't a Freemason. When the Nazis came after me, there was no one left to speak for me. And I think everyone wants to speak for each other, and we don't want history to repeat itself. So.
You mentioned the march planned in Boston, so that's breaking and it's happening right now.
Right now.
What's happening there?
So there was a group of right-wing activists who planned a march in Boston.
Not Nazi. They did not claim to be Nazis.
Correct. Yeah, they wanted to admonish white supremacy.
Free speech rally.
They called it a free speech rally.
Yeah, which had some fairly controversial alt-right figures, but it was not identified as being a Nazi rally.
Well, there are counter-protesters that showed up, just like in Charlottesville, worried that it could turn violent. And from what we can tell so far, I haven't seen any violence breaking out, but the quote here we have is, it looks like the far-right demonstrators are outnumbered like 10-1 by counter-protesters.
I'm seeing numbers
which is good.
Around
That's the tactic we need.
15,000. I'm seeing about like 100 people at the free speech rally, about 15,000.
That
more
is
than 10-1,
fantastic.
but
I mean, it's ridiculous what I'm seeing here.
That's
I'm looking at these
fantastic.
crowds here. It is really quite something. Folks in Boston have just decided that they are going to represent themselves. And this is what does need to happen.
Yeah.
When we can start to say to people, no, you are outnumbered, and maybe you ought to rethink life choices.
Yeah.
I just want to go on record as saying that I am totally and completely against ethnic cleansing, because it
way to be bold.
Because it narrows my dating pool. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, folks, we're going to have to wrap up the show, but I want people to know where they can connect with our guest today. So why don't you go for it?
Okay. You can visit News What News on Facebook, on Twitter. You can listen to us Tuesdays 4 to 6 on 1680 AM and Que4.org. And can I do? I normally do a little segment in my show where we de-stress from all the news. I call it Darren fluffing with Darren. A fluff piece.
Oh, Darren, Darren, this is a family show here.
And a fluff piece in the news is a throwaway thing, that feel good type thing, and so.
All right, what you got?
Okay.
All right, what do you got, man?
Yesterday, this is a cool story. Yesterday, Neil Gaiman was at JFK. Wait. Did you hear about this?
I did. I'm so psyched. I'm so geeking out. I love this story.
So he went to JFK. He went to a bookstore and he personally autographed every copy of his book that's in that bookstore.
Good Omens, yeah.
Without nobody seeing it. So if you're in JFK and you happen to go into a bookstore, look for his book.
He went to the store and just covertly just signed all of his books that were there. Good Omens and American Gods and all that. So
isn't that crazy?
That's
the kind of thing that I do to de-stress from all the politics and all the. I try to do feel good and.
If I ever publish a book, I'm totally doing that.
You have an admirer in the United Kingdom right now who is very excited about you fluffing all your listeners. So
thank you.
He really appreciates you.
Fantastic.
Okay, folks. All right, folks. Want to thank everybody for joining us today. A great show. We're looking forward to having Daniel and Fernando back next week. They're going to be talking about being at the Clean Water Rally. Because, we do have to fight for clean water here in the United States.
Flint is still having problems.
And this is in East Chicago, folks.
East Chicago, Indiana.
So we're going to have a lot of news for you next week. Remind everybody, bread and butter of independent media is social media. Please go like and follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and on Facebook in particular, as well as YouTube. Keep in mind, if you want to keep up with our live streams, we do several each week, get onto Facebook. You can go to hardlensmedia.com. We have links to all of our social accounts. Also, a podcast of this show will be available for download and streaming within a couple of days. You can subscribe to us on podcasts via iTunes. iTunes Podcast, you can subscribe to us. That's a great way to support what we do. Please do like and share. We really appreciate everybody's support. So take care of yourselves, folks. Have a great week, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Great show, guys.